Well, anyone whose family has been through a separation or a divorce knows that it is a stressful time. There's lots of change to navigate. Tensions, emotions are high. And that's one reason why counselors are being hired by divorce lawyers and incorporated in their process. And since it's Mental Health Week, we thought it fitting to talk about how that can change the dynamic between former spouses. Annette Katchaluba is a social worker and director of child-centered divorce services by Peaceful Waters in Waterloo. Good morning, Annette.
Good morning.
So what tends to happen to people's mental health as they go through a separation or a divorce?
Well, as you know, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, social well-being, and it's affecting how we think, how we feel, how we act. And what we see in divorce is that this change is creating a lot of stress for families. People are struggling with depression, anxiety. They're experiencing a wide range of emotions from sadness and grief to anger and frustration. And then looking into their future, some are struggling with wondering, I have a lot of fear. How am I going to cope financially? How is my future going to look now that my life is going in a direction I never thought it would?
Right. It's such a period of things are so unknown, right?
Everything is changing. Yeah, everything that's foundational to people. So they're looking at changes in their finances, in their housing, potentially in their family structure. As for some people, it's job place change, and then also just in their own relationships. And so there's a lot of stress, and what we know is that stress impacts people's mental health. Did you know, and I don't know if I just found this out, divorce is actually ranked as the second most stressful experience that people can go through.
Wow.
Yeah, that's stunning, right? To think about that. It's such a major life change, but we can't minimize the emotional impact of that. And that's why it's so critical that when you're working with a professional team to walk you through a divorce, you're asking that professional team to take into account the impact that this is going to have on your mental health. And the collaborative practice does that really, really well.
I don't want to go too far into this, but what's number one? Do you know?
It is the death of a spouse.
Okay. I was like, wow, I thought divorce would have, it's up there pretty high. You've been doing this for 16 years. I mean, what changes have you seen in the way that separations and divorces have been handled?
Well, typically we had kind of one approach, go to court. And that approach, when it started, maybe more of a focus in the 70s, the thought was just go to court and prove who the better parent is. And then that parent can be the real parent and the other parent can be a visitor parent. And what we've understood now is that really to do well by children and families, we need to think about the whole family moving forward differently, which means we're not thinking about choose the better parent anymore. We're thinking about how do we help families move forward and maybe co-parent or be more cooperative with one another. And so that's a major shift. The tricky part is the process of going through court doesn't always lend itself to that approach. So although the judges may have taken a shift in their perspective, how do we do well by the whole family, think about the impact long term, the affidavit material is still about pointing the finger and proving who the better parent is, which is really not helpful when you're walking families through.
And obviously this is made all the more difficult and exacerbated if and when there are children involved, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
yes.
I would assume, I'm not saying that it's an easy go, but it is easier when children aren't in the mix, I would guess. At least this part of it.
This part, the financial pressures, especially families who are going through a separation later in life and they're looking at, retirement years and how do I manage that? And of course, with our housing market, we're seeing incredible stress for people.
Boy. So how do you handle a scenario when one spouse is really on board with seeing a counselor and maybe the other spouse is, but not?
Well, the great part about the collaborative practice is that our group of lawyers who practice collaboratively make it a requirement to join that practice group to walk through your separation and divorce with a collaborative group. You're going to involve a family professional because the first thing we want to do is actually take into account the mental health issues. You are meeting individually with a social worker to learn what are the dynamics that have existed in the family, what are the patterns of behavior, has there been abuse, and what do we as professionals need to think about in terms of the impact of mental health for families. And so it's a requirement right at the beginning. And that's why we're doing better job with this with families, because we're actually accounting for all of these issues right up front.
It is Mental Health Week in Canada, and there still continues to be a stigma around mental wellness, right, and admitting things. But what about stigma around divorce? I mean, what about that? What would you like to see addressed there?
I think we're recognizing it's happening, and we are doing well by people by saying, how do we help you get through this without having to turn it into something so messy? So the stigma is you are in a broken family and everything's fallen apart. The hope now is that we're saying to people, we're really sorry that your family has to go through this, but your separation doesn't have to fail. What we can do for you is help you move forward well. And that's why we focus so much in our practice about taking care of mental health, checking in with people so that we can provide them with outcomes that we know are going to last a long time, but also we're going to minimize the stressors and the changes that they face going forward.
This has been terribly interesting, Annette. Thank you for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Annette Katchaluba is a social worker and director of Child-Centered Divorce Services by Peaceful Waters in Waterloo. She's also a member of Best for All, that is a collaborative family law team in Waterloo Region.